Great. Thank you, Amy, and Randy, and we appreciate that's a lot to dig into here, and we already have a lot of questions. So we'll get to questions, and I would just remind folks, if you do want to ask, you can do it through the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll get to as many as we can in a few minutes. Let me go back. Amy and Randy both used the term weaponization of, the fight against of anti-Semitism and the fight against anti-Semitism. And let's talk specifically about higher ed for a moment, right? And I think like you laid out, Amy, well, what's happening, what the Trump administration is doing on campuses, in many places, not just the 60 that got the letter, and, you look at Columbia and things like that. Can you just say more about what maybe the worst aspects of that are that you've said, actually threaten democracy, make Jewish students less safe, by the way. But what should campuses be doing? What's a better response to deal with legitimate anti-Semitism or anti-Muslim, anti-Arab hate on campuses without impinging academic freedom, without impinging on people's, First Amendment rights to democratically express themselves?
I'm taking that first.
Yeah.
Very happy to. Look, I think what we've heard largely from students and faculty around the country, and I spend a lot of time on campuses. I was at University of Michigan a few weeks ago. I've been at my alma mater, Tufts, a number of times. I serve on the Hillel board there and have been grateful to really spend time with faculty and students. And spent a lot of time on a number of campuses and in communities around the country. And it feels like we are facing, at least as of right now, and we know that this could change, in the drop of a dime, a very different environment than we faced last year. Last year was incredibly fraught. I don't need to tell people on this call this on a number of campuses, not everywhere. There were some campuses that were sort of immune from some of these challenges in many ways, but on a number of campuses, including a number of the higher profile ones, there were very real challenges and very real anti-Semitism in certain cases. What we have seen work has been effectively and consistently enforcing codes of conduct. When there is consistent enforcement of codes of conduct, when students, no matter who they are or what they believe, are treated consistently and uniformly, that makes the world of difference, because no one is being singled out because of who they are or are not protesting. There is something that is infringing on students' ability to study, and learn, to live their lives on campus. We have codes of conduct that are meant to preclude that becoming a problem. And where we saw the biggest challenges in the early days of the protesters, where there wasn't uniform and consistent enforcement of these codes of conduct. So first and foremost, making sure that university administrators are really empowered to enforce their codes of conduct, that they have strong codes of conduct that balance both the needs of students, their rights to live and study safely and without hate, and to also make sure that people's fundamental First Amendment rights and civil liberties are also protected there, as you said. And we know that that is possible. That is really at the core of what universities should be. They should be places of robust debate, of hard conversations, of hearing things that we certainly don't agree with, and that might even be deeply challenging and even hurtful in certain cases. And for there to be very clear codes of conduct that draw lines about where that conduct crosses the line and what that accountability will look like.
Thank you. Randy, do you want to chime in on?
I mean, look, Amy is completely 100% right, and it's not easy. And so, but I think that a lot of different things should have happened on the Columbia campus. And if somebody who wears a yarmulke is being told to go burn in an oven, that is an anti-Semitic, that is anti-Semitic words that should have been acted on. It's not a close call. You're actually inciting and harming. If somebody is saying that, lifting up Hamas, I think that's wrong. Personally, I think Hamas is a terrorist organization. And, and the issue about whether or not people are called freedom fighters when they're terrorists, I think there's going to be a bunch of questions about, is that speech? Probably, as as much of an anathema it is to me, it's probably speech that is covered in a protest unless it's violent.
Mhm.
So there's lines here that will be hard, things that I fiercely disagree with, but I'm going to protect the speech. But when they become incitement and violence to individuals, that's incitement and violence, and something has to be stopped. I think that there's a lot of different campuses that figured out how to do this, and there were several high profile campuses that did not. And then, unfortunately, in what happened in Columbia's case, there has been a lot of texting and other kinds of things that showed that there was people who didn't have the best interest of students at heart and were part of the problem, not part of the solution. And I think that's why you're seeing now on the Columbia campus a lot of expulsions, a lot of suspensions, but on the issues that Amy just talked about, which is that the code of conduct was violated. So I'm not saying that it's not hard to do, and we represent the faculty at Columbia, and we represent a lot of faculty at Cornell, and we represent a lot of faculty who probably completely disagree with a lot of the questions that we got in the chat. But we have to, what Amy just said earlier about also, and this is one of the other issues, the conflation of Israel and anti-Semitism. And so the question, I always think about it in this way. Any criticism of America, is that legitimate criticism or not legitimate criticism? Can you criticize America? Can you go to a hands-off rally on Saturday? And is that going to be are you going to be charged with incitement if you criticize America? The same is true in terms of Israel. Can you criticize Israel? Can you not criticize Israel? If you criticize Israel's right to exist, does that get you borderline to, is it anti-Semitism? And this becomes the very difficult question, because if you actually start saying Israel has no right to exist, but you don't say any other countries, like, I don't know, China, any other countries like Syria have no right to exist. Now that is raised to the level of anti-Semitism. In some instances, it could. That's part of the difficulty that both of us, both Amy and I, have in terms of, is this on the left anti-Semitism? So the engagement of people about what this means, if you're actually trying to get rid of a particular population, one way or the other, is that anti-Semitism? Or is it also anti-Palestinian? So part of what we're trying to do is the lines, if you spit at somebody who wears a yarmulke, that's anti-Semitism. Everybody sees it that way. If you say you Jew should go to hell, that's anti-Semitism. But this kind of pitch battle over the issue of what happened in Gaza, that's part of why we have this work that we're doing together to figure out the next stage, which is what Amy talked about. What's safe and welcoming? What's the code of conduct? So not just what the intent behind the speech was, but what was the behavior? And if the behavior violates a code of conduct, that has to be adhered to regardless of what the intent was.
Okay, thanks, Randy. And to Amy's point about the codes of conduct that you were mentioning, Randy, I would just offer, you said we represent higher ed all over. The AFT represents higher ed folks all over the country, including here in Illinois. And, a value is shared governance, right? Those codes of conduct, our faculty want to say in how they are developed and what they say. And we know in too many places that has not happened with faculty input. Let me shift a little bit, taking from something you just said, Randy, to K-12. And I think I just want to say we have a few people who've raised their hand, and I would just say we've got over 300 people on the call, which is fantastic. And the call's being recorded, and there are other people who registered who will, when it's available tomorrow, want to watch it. So we're going to have a lot more than 300 people see this. But if you have your hand raised, no need to raise your hand. But if you have a question, put it in the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll try to get to as many. And I think I'm going to go to a question right now that moves us to K-12 speech. And
actually, Dan, let me just make sure that because somebody said to me I wasn't clear. Violence is not free speech. Destruction of private property is not free speech. We're talking about free speech, but I wanted to make sure that I got to the hard questions that people were asking about in the chat. So that's what I tried to do.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. So I went to in January for the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. You sent me, Randy, which I appreciate, to a seminar there that was about the teaching of the Holocaust. And prepare for that, I talked to a lot of social studies and history teacher colleagues here in the States in K-12, who to a person basically said this is the hardest moment ever in their careers to teach post October 7th, because from sort of both sides, if you will, a lot of students looking for that teacher to be wrong. They're afraid of saying the wrong thing, which really worries me, right? As an educator and as a citizen, we can't have teachers afraid of teaching, especially if they start to back off the teaching of the Holocaust or difficult histories. So a question from Jill is, what does the right to protest and Palestinian self-determination have to do with K-12 education? So we're going to that's Jill's question. I'll say it again. What does the right to protest and Palestinian self-determination have to do with K-12 education? I think it's a good question.
So let me talk about it from a union standpoint, not from the standpoint of what we can and can't teach, which is a whole nother standpoint that we should be talking about. When we fought for Solidarność in Poland and fought for freedom for educators and for people from communism, we didn't get this question about whether or not a trade union who is devoted to democracy here and abroad should be engaged in democracy here and abroad. We as a union are engaged in democracy here and abroad. We are engaged as part of Education International, as is NEA, with teachers all across the world. We are engaged with trying to fight for democracy and peace all across the world. And I would actually argue, given globalization, what happens across the world happens here as well. And so this is something that any teacher or any member at our conventions can put any resolution in about anything. That's their rights as a member. And so part of what we tried to do in our resolutions this year was to create some guardrails about not only about and some positions about where we stood. And we were very critical of Netanyahu. And we basically, when we not only were critical, we slammed Hamas. In fact, we got a lot of criticism about how we were the only union, or actually one of only a very few unions, who actually slammed Hamas after October 7th because of what they did and how they violated lives and murdered people. So that's part of who we are as a union, to take these positions. And we have had for as long as the union has been in existence, since 1916. And that's part of what people are entitled to do at our conventions, and locals are entitled to do it as well. We would hope that after we take a position nationally, as we have about the conflict, that our locals would see that position as guiding in terms of the union. And there were big fights at the convention about whether or not the position we took in January, which was that we believe that Jews have a right to have a homeland, and we believe that Palestinians have a right to have a homeland, and we believe that that there needs to be peace in the land, that the hostages needed to be brought home, and that there needs to be humanitarian surge. And that was a position that we took at that time. Now, there was a lot of debate about it. There was the debate about whether there should be boycott sanctions. That went down. There was debate about embargoes and arms embargoes. That went down. Overwhelmingly, the members took the positions that are in our resolutions right now. And so that's what we have done nationally in terms of positions.
Okay, thanks, Randy. So I want to just kind of go back into where we were a minute ago on democracy and higher education here. And today, there's more news, more Trump attacks on DOE and things like that. So can you, maybe I'll turn to you first, Amy, on this, make the nexus for us between the harm, between Jewish safety, harm for Jewish students through anti-Semitism, academic freedom. What is this attack on the DOE? What's the connection there between what the administration is trying to do around those things and fighting anti-Semitism?
Yeah. Look, there's so much to say, and I'll say particularly to build on what Randy was just saying, part of all of this is is the attack on knowledge, right? How we can have robust conversations about the issues of the day in a way that protects students no matter who they are, that is rooted in shared humanity and dignity of people around the world, including here, and how we can empower educators, administrators, and others to facilitate those sorts of conversations rather than reinforcing the sort of zero-sum binaries of these debates that ultimately lead to the sort of harm that we've been talking about, including on campuses or in K through 12 schools, when we are so focused on the sort of zero-sum approach to understanding Israel and Gaza that we lose sight of the humanity and dignity of anyone involved, whether it's there or here, in terms of the ripple effects of the conflict in terms of anti-Semitism and other forms of hate. On this question on the Department of Ed specifically, there's so much to say about the ways in which dismantling DOE fundamentally cuts to the core of Jewish safety. And I'll say first and foremost, right, if this administration were serious about confronting anti-Semitism, there are so many things it could do. If it was serious about confronting anti-Semitism on campus, it would start by not dismantling the Department of Ed and the Office of Civil Rights, which is the core office at the Department of Ed tasked with protecting the civil rights of Jewish and all students. But we've seen a decimation of OCR over the last 2 months. It was already operating with far too little resources, even under the Biden administration. During the Biden administration, there were over 50 cases per caseworker there of people who were assigned with investigating claims of anti-Semitism and other forms of discrimination and civil rights violations on campus. So we already were coming at this from sort of a crisis level when it came to protecting students in K through 12 schools and universities. And that was the starting point. Trump has now come in and he has wholly dismantled OCR. There have been offices shut down around the country. We are seeing a total decimation of the very office that we have intended to protect Jewish and all students' rights. And so first and foremost, that is the most obvious and immediate way in which we know this is having ripple effects. But look, the ways in which the Department of Education and the core function it plays in our society is so inherent to Jewish safety and rights it's sort of embedded in my own story, right? My grandparents were Holocaust survivors. They came here with virtually nothing and they worked, there was seamstress and a taxi driver. Both my parents, because of public education, became New York City public school teachers, and they worked tirelessly as teachers, and in turn gave me the ability to through my own public education, build the life that I'm now having, and hopefully my daughter will go on to go to public school when she's old enough in a few years. And so the ways in which Jewish safety and advancement in America is so inextricably tied to our public education system. I mean, you just need to ask any of us about our personal stories to really understand that. And so to see the decimation of our education system, to see it in service of what this administration claims is, among other things, Jewish safety, including the millions and billions of dollars they are now seeking to gut from our universities, is just devastating. And it does nothing to advance Jewish safety, and it does everything to undermine our safety and rights and the rights and safety of each and every other community in this country.
Thank you. Randy, do you want to comment on that?
I think Amy is completely, and I'm glad we are segueing to this. I think Amy is completely right. It is exploiting an issue to actually harm people. How do you take away Congress, take all the research grants in universities? It's clear that the administration right now is hostile to all kinds of knowledge. How do you basically take hundreds of millions of dollars in research grants and say that from here on in, we are only going to pay 7 or 10% on indirect costs when we normally pay, then normally the administration normally pays 50% on indirect costs. It means that places like Hopkins, Cornell, Columbia, many of the state universities, all the research that they do is basically going to be cut. I'm not even talking about what happened at Columbia or at Harvard. That is an attack on knowledge. What we've been doing in terms of the fighting to keep Title I, IDEA, this is an attack on knowledge, to actually take this money and either use it for tax cuts for Elon Musk and other billionaires, or use it to change these grants to block grants so that they could be used for vouchers. What happens to a reading specialist in a school? What happens to an OT or PT or all the paraprofessionals? These are the fights that we're having. And the other fight that we're having is the issue about what you can teach in classrooms. So the memo that came from the Department of Education today essentially said, states, you must certify that there is nothing that's happening that involves diversity, equity, or inclusion. So does that mean you can't have a Jewish heritage or a Juneteenth celebration in June? Is that what that means? Does that, and just like they did with Columbia, does that mean they're going to take all the Title I money of a summer school program or an after school program because a school has a Juneteenth or a Jewish heritage celebration or a gay pride celebration in June? If you're a social studies teacher like I am, does it mean you can still teach Jim Crow or not? Does it mean you can teach the Holocaust or not? The Holocaust these days is divisive. Does it mean you can't teach it? So the deeper question here, once we get past the issue of safety, the other question here is they're just going after knowledge, and they're trying to pit two communities against each other, meaning the community that believes in democracy and opportunity versus making sure that people are safe.
And if I could just build on what Randy was saying, we've already seen how these attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which first and foremost, from a Jewish values perspective, are out of line. Also, from a Jewish community perspective, the Jewish community itself is remarkably diverse. There are Jews of color and LGBTQ Jews and immigrant and refugee Jews and so many others who are impacted by this. But also, we are now seeing the ways in which these attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion are actually directly impacting, as Randy suggested, Holocaust Remembrance Day, Jewish heritage celebrations, Jewish affinity groups. And so if we as Jews think that this is not going to have a direct effect on us, we're fooling ourselves. And the ways in which these attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion are being used to pit communities against one another, divide, sow division and distrust, and ultimately undermine the right that all of us have to live freely and safely and to live and learn about our history is clear. And I also will say that at the same time, and this is true with diversity, equity, and inclusion, this is true with ethnic studies curricula, it's so important that we not shy away from the importance of these curricula and of these programs and of these values. And I also believe deeply that it is both possible and necessary to do so in a way that is wholly inclusive and protective of Jewish identity, history, and values. And we know that in some of these cases, there have been ethnic studies curricula or DEI curricula in specific cases that have been focused on Israel or even veered into direct harm against Jews in a way that is unacceptable. And what we can do as Jewish leaders, as educators, and others is make sure that as we advance these values, as we advance diversity, equity, inclusion, and ethnic studies, and all of these values and curricula that are core to what this country should be and how we ensure all of us are truly safe and seen in this country, that we do so in a way that is inclusive and respectful of the Jewish community as it should be of each and every other community.
Thank you. The high school teacher in me loves everything you just said. I just want to say a couple of housekeeping things because we are heading towards the hour time limit that we set. And of course, look, an hour is insufficient to really cover all this stuff in the way we'd love to, but I think everything that's happened here has really been quite useful. I want people to know that tomorrow, this was recorded, it'll be available to watch again, but tomorrow the Shanker Institute will send through the email used to register resources from both AFT and JCPA. So really appreciate that. Let's conclude with that a little bit if we can. Just going forward, make this a little bit more positive looking. Randy and Amy, you talked about the partnership between AFT and JCPA at the beginning. Can you say a little bit more about that? I mean, what if for educators out there or just other folks who are interested and worried about these issues, what does the partnership offer? How does it help us move forward? And what would you say to people on the call for like how we move to a better place among these issues?
You want me to start, Randy?
Yeah.
Great. Well, look, I think to step back, we're at a moment when the loudest voices are seeking so desperately to pit our communities against one another. We're seeing it from the far right, we're seeing it from the far left, and it is making all of us less safe. It is making Jews fundamentally less safe when we're treated as sort of a political football in that regard. And it's not allowing us to actually build the strong, inclusive, broad coalitions we need to protect democracy, to protect public education, to counter hate, and to do all of the things that are inherent to our safety and long-term futures. And that's exactly what extremists want. We're living in this highly polarized, highly divisive moment, and it's operating as this constant feedback loop in which this division and extremism is reinforced in a way that makes it harder and harder for us to actually come together in the way that we need at a moment when it's more urgent than ever. And so that's really the idea at the core of this partnership, that these extreme voices, whether they are on campuses or in our politics or elsewhere, are seeking to really sow division. And we know that despite some of the challenges that have existed between local Jewish communities and local unions or some of these other sticky issues that we know are real, there is so much more at stake if we can't figure out a way to work together constructively and effectively and rebuild relationships and trust. And so there's a number of things that we can do. One, I've been really grateful to be working with Randy and the fantastic AFT team already on workshops and programs that we've done at AFT's convenings and conferences focused on understanding anti-Semitism and how we can counter anti-Semitism and broader hate on campus in a way that is truly effective, constructive, and inclusive. And we're going to keep working on that. We're also working with local communities around the country where there are local Jewish communities, including our Jewish Community Relations Councils, who are core partners of JCPA, and local teachers unions, to help bring together these communities in a way to address local challenges, recognizing that there has been tension in some places, that there has been harm caused in certain places, and that there's a way to actually hopefully bridge. It's easier said than done in certain places. In some places, there's fantastic longstanding relationships between the local Jewish communal institutions and the local union. In other places, it's really fraught right now. And our goal is to figure out how we can begin to do some of that work to bridge those challenges, to lift up models of success, and figure out a way to advocate together against hate, for our democracy, for our public education, for our institutions at a moment when they're under such threat, and when we need to make sure, as Randy said to start the call, that every student, every faculty member, every educator feels safe in their union and in their school, which is goal number one. And so there's so much more that we will be building out. I think certainly in terms of how we on the national level also find many reasons to partner on shared advocacy and values in the months ahead, as we look towards, again, the dismantling of the Department of Ed and so much else that's coming down the pike. We know will be significant. But if folks are interested in working with us, just reach out to JCPA or reach out to AFT. And there will also, I'm sure, be resources in the email that goes out tomorrow. And let us know. Let us know what's going on in your community and how we, through this partnership, can work and support you in moving forward.
Great, thank you. Randy, do you want to chime in on
Thank
that?
you, Amy. And I have been trying to look at the questions
Yeah.
in the chat as we've been on the Zoom, because we want to be responsive to many of them. There's a lot. There's one of the reasons we have this partnership is that there's a lot of fear, and you can hear that and see that in the questions that we just saw. So we kind of veered off to kind of deal with some of that fear. Let me be really clear again. We are meeting with different groups and teachers in different locals. When we see fear, we're going to fight that fear. Nobody should fear, because nobody should be attacked in any way that is anti-Semitic. Period. Full stop. And part of what we're trying to do is figure out not only how to say that, not only how to go to an administration and say stop, but also figure out what the underlying issues are so that we can actually rebuild the trust in a community. That's part of what we're trying to do in this partnership. The second piece we're trying to do nationally is to not let communities be split apart like they were in Ocean Hill-Brownsville, like they have been in other times, in other history, throughout thousands of years, when Jews got blamed, and then that blame turned into from incitement to murder. We are trying to figure out ways to ensure that we can have the pluralism that actually has been the single most important piece in America that has helped all communities succeed, particularly the Jewish community. That's why knowledge and opportunity and fairness and due process and all these things that Amy and I both talked about tonight are so important. But I see a lot of fear in the chat, and I also see a lot of what people are saying. You know, I see a lot of terminology that I wouldn't normally use. So this is the first of several times that we will get together if people want it. If people have found that this has been helpful and there are certain other things, write us in terms of aft.org, write to us at aft.org, write to us to tell us what you thought was helpful here, what wasn't helpful here. And we're going to try, using this partnership, to meet with different groups and different locals in terms of trying to create the pluralism, the understanding, the codes of conduct that we think that people need to create a trusting community, even if they disagree on issues like Israel and Gaza. That's part of what we're trying to do. And we're also trying to make sure that this administration can't use this kind of weaponization against groups who are trying to make sure that we create opportunity for all and dignity for all. Just like we went out and said, no, you can't ban books, and we gave books away instead of banning books. No, you can't stop the teaching of honest history. Teachers have a right and should have a right, and kids should have a right to learn that. No, you can't stop research grants because you don't like how Columbia handled certain things. That's what we're trying to do here. And I really, really appreciate this partnership with JCPA in terms of trying to tackle what everyone on this Zoom is saying is a really important issue for their safety, for ensuring that they feel seen, and for ensuring that they feel safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Randy. Very well said. And so may we all work towards that trust that you lined out. So that's it for tonight. We really appreciate on behalf of the Albert Shanker Institute, Randy and the AFT, Amy and the Jewish Council for Public Affairs. As I said, if you registered for this, we have your email. We will send you resources in the next day or so, and the link to this webinar will be posted so people can watch it and share it as well. Let me just say again, on behalf of the Shanker Institute, how much we really appreciate this. And I'm glad to hear you say, Randy, too. This can be the beginning of other conversations, not the end all and be all. And Lord knows there's a lot to talk about in this moment. The Shanker Institute that's committed to advocating for labor, education, and democracy. And that's what this was all about tonight. So thank you, Randy. Thank you, Amy. And thank you all for joining. Appreciate it. Take care, everybody.
Thank you
Good
so
night.
much.